June 5th, 1944. Somewhere in the English Channel, a 19-year-old private from Virginia is checking his rifle for the third time. He has 80 pounds of gear on his back, a life vest that will not work if it gets punctured, and orders to cross 60 meters of open sand towards a concrete bunker he has never seen. He does not know that the beach he's heading for has twice as many machine guns as anyone planned for. He does not know the weapon waiting for him fires 20 rounds per second. He does not know that most of the men standing next to him right now will not be standing by noon. Some of what you're about to hear is hard to sit with. Most people know the MG-42 was fast. That is the beginning and end of the popular understanding. What almost nobody talks about is the system built around that gun. The MG-42 was not just a weapon. It was the organizing principle of the entire German infantry squad. Every rifleman, every ammunition carrier, every tactical decision in a 9-man squad existed to keep that one gun firing. The squad did not support the machine gun. The squad was the machine gun. And there's a second thing most people overlook. The men who fired these weapons did not walk away clean. Many of them broke. They broke in the field, mid-battle, hands still on the trigger. You see, there's a specific kind of psychological damage that comes from killing at industrial speed. And it has almost nothing to do with courage or cowardice. It has to do with the fact that the human nervous system was never designed to process what an MG-42 gunner saw through his sights on June 6th, 1944. To understand why, we need to start with the weapon itself. After the First World War, Germany's entire military doctrine changed. The machine gun had dominated the trenches, but it had been a defensive tool, heavy, water-cooled, bolted to a position. The MG-08 weighed 58 pounds before you added water and ammunition. It wasn't going anywhere fast. The new German doctrine demanded something different. Blitzkrieg required infantry that could move with armor. An infantry that moved with armor needed a machine gun that could keep up. The first attempt was the MG-13 in 1930. Lighter, air-cooled, but it fed from a 25-round magazine that lasted roughly 2.5 seconds of continuous fire. Not enough. Then came the MG-34 in 1934, and this was a genuine leap. Belt-fed, quick-change barrel, 900 rounds per minute. It was the world's first true general-purpose machine gun, meaning it could serve as both a light squad weapon and as a heavy sustained fire platform, depending on its mount. But the MG-34 had a problem. It was beautifully machined, precisely fitted, and extraordinarily expensive. Each one required 150 man-hours to produce. Germany was preparing for a war it intended to fight on multiple fronts. It could not afford to hand-build its most important infantry weapon. So in 1942, the Wehrmacht issued a specification that sounded almost contradictory. Build a machine gun that fires 1,200 rounds per minute, make it reliable, make it light, and cut the production time in half. The engineers at Metall- und Lackierwarenfabrik Johannes Grossfuss AG did something nobody expected. They used stamped metal parts instead of machined components. They cut production time from 150 man-hours to 75. And the gun they produced was not merely cheaper than the MG-34, it was better. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute. Some variants reached 1,500. That's 20 to 25 bullets leaving the barrel. M1919 fired 400 to 600 rounds per minute. The British Vickers, roughly the same. The MG-42 doubled them both. At that rate of fire, individual gunshots disappeared. What you heard instead was a continuous ripping sound, like heavy canvas being torn in half. It was so fast that the human ear could not separate one round from the next. American soldiers called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The Soviets called it the linoleum ripper. But the German infantrymen who depended on it every day had the most honest name of all, the bone saw. But here here's what almost every account of the MG-42 leaves out. The gun's rate of fire, its weight, its barrel, none of that is what made it truly devastating. What made it devastating was a decision not made in a factory, but in a military doctrine manual. A decision that turned the oldest unit in warfare, the infantry squad, into something that had never existed before. And when you understand what they built, the casualty figures from a certain beach in Normandy stop being statistics. They start making terrible sense. Here's the thing most people miss about the MG-42. The weapon itself was only half the equation. The other half was how Germany built its entire infantry around it. A standard German infantry squad in 1944 consisted of 9 men, one squad leader with an MP-40 submachine gun, one second in command, 5 riflemen carrying Kar-98 bolt-action rifles, and a 2-man machine gun team. 2 men, 1 gun, and those 2 men were the reason the other 7 existed. The machine gunner, designated Schütze 1, carried the MG-42 itself, plus a sidearm and one 50-round ammunition drum. The assistant gunner sat to his left or rear, carrying 4 additional 50-round drums and one 300-round belt box. His job was to feed ammunition, clear jams, swap barrels, and take over firing if the gunner went down. The ammunition carrier sat further back with 2 more 300-round boxes and a shortened Kar-98. In total, the squad carried at least 1,800 rounds for the MG-42. Every rifleman carried extra machine gun ammunition on top of his own .45 rifle rounds. The squad's grenades, its tripod, its spare barrels, all of it was organized around keeping that single weapon in the fight. This was not a machine gun attached to an infantry squad. This was an infantry squad attached to a machine gun. And on the morning of June 6, 1944, those squads were dug in along the Normandy coastline, looking straight down at 5 beaches full of men with nowhere to hide. The German defenses at Omaha Beach were organized into a series of strongpoints the Germans called Widerstandsnester, resistance nests. Each one contained multiple fighting positions, usually connected by trenches, and each one was built around at least one MG-42. Allied planners expected roughly 40 machine gun positions covering Omaha. They were wrong. The unexpected presence of the German 352nd Infantry Division had doubled the number to approximately 80 or 90. The men hitting the beach that morning were walking into twice the firepower anyone had planned for. The guns were sighted for interlocking fields of fire. That's a technical phrase that means something very simple and very terrible. It means there was no safe ground. The kill zones overlap. If you moved left to escape one gun, you walked into the cone of another. Try to hold this in your mind. You're 19 years old. You're standing in waist-deep water 60 meters from dry sand. The man in front of you just dropped. The man beside him just dropped. The ramp of your landing craft is a funnel pointed directly at a concrete bunker, and the sound coming out of that bunker is not gunfire as you have ever imagined it. It's a continuous mechanical shriek. It does not pause, does not stutter. It sounds like a machine, not a weapon, because at 1,200 rounds per minute, that is exactly what it is, a machine for killing. At Widerstandsnest 62, a strongpoint covering the eastern section of Omaha Beach, a 20-year-old German soldier named Heinrich Zeverlo was assigned to an MG-42. He had clear sight lines to the waterline below. When the first American landing craft dropped their ramps, Zeverlo opened fire. By his own account, he fired approximately 12,000 rounds from his MG-42 that morning. When the barrel overheated and the gun became inoperable, he picked up a rifle and continued shooting. He fired until he ran out of ammunition. Then he fired ammunition scavenged from dead men around him. His later testimony was not boastful. It was the testimony of a man describing something he wished he could forget. Nobody can imagine the slaughter, he said. The beach below his position was, by mid-morning, no longer a beach. It was a field of bodies and equipment, the tide running pink. Zeverlo would later be called the Beast of Omaha. He did not choose the name. Zeverlo was one gunner at one strong point on one beach. Across all 5 Normandy landing zones, hundreds of MG-42 crews were doing the same thing at the same time. At Juno Beach, the Canadian 3rd Division ran into MG-42 nests built into houses and short obstacles at Courseulles-sur-Mer and Bernier. The Canadians suffered 946 casualties on D-Day, the second highest number of any beach, and a disproportionate number fell in the first hour, raked by machine gun fire before they could get out of the water. At Gold Beach, the British 50th Division took roughly between 700 and 1,100 casualties. The western end, near Le Hamel, was particularly brutal, where a fortified emplacement with MG-42s killed dozens of British soldiers before Royal Engineers and tanks destroyed it. At Sword Beach, enfilading M42 fire from a casino strongpoint pinned British troops in the Queen Red sector. 630 men fell on Sword that day. And then there was Utah. The 4th Division landed there and suffered 197 casualties. The reason Utah was different is the same reason the other beaches were hell. The MG-42 positions at Utah were few, poorly sighted, and quickly neutralized by naval gunfire. Where the gun worked as designed, men died by the hundreds. Where it did not, they survived. That gap, 197 casualties versus 3,000, tells you everything about what one weapon system meant on June 6th. The MG-42 fired so fast that its barrels glowed red after approximately 250 rounds, roughly 12 seconds of continuous fire. A barrel that was not swapped would warp, then fail, then potentially explode. A trained assistant gunner could swap a barrel in under 10 seconds. Release the latch on the side, pull the glowing tube free, do not touch it with your bare hands. Slot the fresh barrel, lock, resume firing. Allied soldiers were trained to exploit that 10-second window. The moment an MG-42 went silent, you moved. Because in 10 seconds, it would be firing again, and if you were still in the open, you were dead. The doctrine was short, controlled bursts, 5 to 7 rounds, trigger discipline. But on the morning of D-Day, with hundreds of men pouring off landing craft into the kill zone, trigger discipline was a luxury. Many gunners fired continuously until the barrel forced them to stop. And there was another problem with the MG-42 that nobody warned you about. Its recoil was severe enough to require a physically strong operator. Firing from a bipod in a prone position was manageable. Firing while standing or well on the move was nearly impossible to control. The gun wanted to climb. It wanted to shake free. Holding it down for extended bursts was an act of physical endurance as much as marksmanship. Before we move on, there's something in the German military records from this period that almost never appears in mainstream accounts of D-Day. It appears in post-war interviews, in unit diaries, in the private correspondence of Wehrmacht officers. It has nothing to do with tactics or casualty figures or the outcome of the battle. It's about what happened to the men behind the guns, not during the fighting, after. And when you read what those men described, the story of the MG-42 becomes something it was never supposed to be. Not a story about a weapon, a story about a cost that nobody put in the production manual. Here's the part of this story that almost never gets told. The MG-42 did not just destroy the men it was aimed at, it destroyed the men who aimed it. There were reports documented in German unit records and post-war interviews of M42 gunners breaking down psychologically during and after heavy engagements, not from fear of dying, from what they had done. You see, most weapons in World War II created a degree of psychological distance between the killer and the killed. An artilleryman fires a shell at coordinates on a map. A bomber pilot drops ordnance from 20,000 feet. Even a rifleman shoots at a figure, a shape, a target. The distance softens the act. An MG-42 gunner at Omaha Beach had no distance. He was close enough to see faces, and his weapon was fast enough that the consequences of pulling the trigger were not abstract. They were immediate, visible, and overwhelming. 1 second, a man was running. The next second, he was not. Multiply that by 12,000 rounds. The psychological term for this is moral injury. It's distinct from PTSD, though they often travel together. PTSD is the imprint of what happened to you. Moral injury is the imprint of what you did. It's the specific damage caused by participating in acts that violate your own moral code, acts you cannot reconcile with the person you believed yourself to be. Heinrich Zeverlo survived the war. He went back to farming, and for decades, he barely spoke about what happened on June 6th. When he finally did, in interviews late in his life, his account was not the account of a soldier proud of his service. It was the account of a man who had carried something for 50 years and never found a place to set it down. The war's end didn't erase that morning, one chronicler wrote of him. The weight never left him. He was not unique. German veterans of the Eastern Front, where the MG-42 was used against Soviet human wave assaults, reported similar psychological collapse among gunners. Men who had fired thousands of rounds into massed infantry, watching the effects in real time, were sometimes unable to function afterwards. Not because they were cowards, because they were human beings operating a weapon that outpaced their nervous system's ability to process what it was doing. The MG-42 was engineered to kill at a rate that exceeded the psychological capacity of the man pulling the trigger. That is not a design flaw, but it is a cost that does not appear in any production manual. The Allies won on D-Day, not because the MG-42 failed, but because they sent enough men and enough material to absorb the losses and keep coming. The German 352nd Division at Omaha had largely expended its machine gun ammunition by noon. By evening, all 5 beachheads were secured. Many MG-42 gunners fought to the death. Their orders were to hold until the last round, and many of them did exactly that. Others were found dead behind their weapons, barrels melted, ammunition boxes empty. Those who surrendered were taken prisoner, though in the immediate aftermath of the killing, not every surrender was accepted cleanly. War is not clean. Over 400,000 MG-42s were produced during the war. After 1945, the design lived on. The modern German military's MG-3 is a direct descendant, rechambered for NATO's 7.62x51 round, but mechanically almost identical. The American M60, the workhorse machine gun of Vietnam, was a direct hybrid of the MG-42 and the FG-42 paratrooper rifle. The weapon's DNA runs through nearly every Western general-purpose machine gun built in the last 80 years. But the legacy that matters most is not mechanical, it is human. The MG-42 proves something that military planners have been grappling with ever since. You can build a weapon that fires faster than the enemy can react. You can build a weapon so effective that it becomes the entire reason your infantry exists, but you cannot build a man to match it. The weapon always outpaces the operator. The rate of fire always exceeds the rate at which a human being can absorb the moral consequence of what that fire does. In the distance between those two rates, the gap between what the trigger does and what the mind can hold, that is where the real damage lives. Not on the beach, not in the bunker, in the 50 years after. If you want to follow the story of the soldier who fought World War II without a weapon, check out our video here.